The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and indeed it is a pleasure to speak on this Horticultural Export Authority Amendment Bill, Mr Speaker. It's a bill that was originally brought into Parliament in 1987 by a Labor government, a very smart piece of legislation that stood the test of time. And I have to say that this bill must be a bit like a dead rat for the National Party to have to swallow. Because what they believe in ultimately, and we've seen it, is that the market should determine our future. The market should drive decisions on capital investment, on research and development, and on where our primary industry should go. That's not the view that Labor has taken, Mr Speaker, and over the years we've introduced legislation like this, introduced legislation that has supported the Kiwi Fruit Marketing Board, that's formed Fonterra, because we believe that through collaboration, cooperation, we can achieve more together. And the alternative, as the horticultural industry realised back in the 80s, and still realises today, is that they need some discipline and some guidelines and some standards which to adhere to, so that when we go offshore and market our products, we don't end up undermining one another and undercutting one another in the marketplace because we're selling the same products basically into the same market. Mr Speaker, it's about collaboration, coordination, and this bill makes changes to and updates the Horticultural Export Authority's jurisdiction. And Mr Speaker, it's a very important mandate that we give this organisation. The power to tax, to levy and to impose discipline and rules and regulations on exporters from this country is not something that Parliament hands over to an organisation lightly, Mr Speaker. And the organisation is an amazing one, because for the total cost of $227,000, Mr Speaker, it oversees market discipline, market development and product development for a $300 million export sector. That is 54 exporters of 9 different products in the horticultural sector, generating $300 million for New Zealand. That's a considerable level of export income, Mr Speaker. And it costs $227,000 to administer that. That's the best value for money piece of legislation I think this Parliament has probably ever passed. Because that cost is after 23 years, I think it is. No, it's more than that. 32 years since 1987. I can't do the maths in a hurry. I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, but the principles remain. That is that where product groups, where growers growing the same product come together and can show a mandate where more than 50% of the growers agree to come together, to levy themselves, to come under the Horticultural Export Authority's mandate, then they sit down and develop a strategy for how they best should develop their products, adhere to standards, and then go and market their product around the world. And it has been outstandingly successful. Mr Speaker, the only ones where there's been better success, I guess, is kiwi fruit, where there's even more discipline, and in dairy, where traditionally there has been a lot. Mr Speaker, the challenge, I guess, for the government is how to apply this wisdom across other areas of the primary sectors. I would start with wool. I'd then move on to wool, where in 2 sectors we've had proud industries that go back well over 100 years, and we've now come to a level where they are still significant exporters, but we don't have the level of confidence either from the producers or in the marketplace to actually move on. The government's thrown effectively $350 million at the meat industry to try and improve it, when arguably a piece of legislation like this could sort out the meat industry and actually deliver a far better outcome for farmers, for exporters and for New Zealand as a whole. And I've certainly suggested to the Minister, I've challenged members of the Select Committee, why doesn't the government develop legislation like this where it allows for and assists with coordination, collaboration in the market for meat, for the three different meat sectors, for beef, for lamb and mutton, and for venison, Mr. Speaker. Three different red meats that are quite unique, that are based on pasture-fed production, have huge potential in the marketplace and could, as I say, be very similar to horticulture. I appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. So Labor supports this legislation, as we did in 1987, to bring it in. We support the update that we're effectively delivering here, Mr. Speaker. And I guess to touch on it briefly, it's I guess to bring it up to the real world where we have, I guess, new methods of information transfer, where it is important. We've got new standards in the market so that we have to meet higher standards of minimum residue levels for products, making sure that the growers are not going to undermine their whole industry by having good standards on the orchard and then following through and being able to assure the importers in those foreign markets that we've delivered them the best possible fruit that we can, Mr. Speaker. As I say, there are the need for more flexible and targeted export market strategies is true now. As there's more information, you've got better transport and logistics systems, you can better target some of those markets and deliver through, I guess, what were fairly basic systems back in the 1980s when this was first developed. Mr. Speaker, horticulture has thrived because it laid out a strategic plan for growth back in the early 2000s. I applaud the sector for that visionary thinking, Mr. Speaker. As I said, other sectors have not shown that wisdom. And so through that planning and through legislation like this that has enabled small groups of growers to come together and develop their markets, horticulture, from the very biggest to the smallest, has had in place a system of planning and discipline that has seen it be arguably one of the most successful sectors in the New Zealand economy, and the growth has been staggering, and I hope it continues, Mr. Speaker. But they should, as I say, learn the lessons from other sectors where deregulation and undisciplined marketing has undermined the value of what are top quality products in New Zealand, sold into market, but ended up competing with one another on the basis of price. Mr. Speaker, I'll just finish with the point raised by my Green colleagues, and that is that the horticultural sector and its wisdom that asked for, firstly, this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and secondly, developed a strategic plan, now has been asking for country of origin labelling, because they believe that the effort they put in to produce the finest horticultural products in the world, the safest products, should be acknowledged by us in the New Zealand market and offshore, providing consumers with the knowledge that these things have been grown in New Zealand, under New Zealand conditions, to sometimes higher standards than that required here, but standards that are very, very high and ensure safe food. I cannot understand why the government doesn't want to move ahead to implement country of origin labelling. We have a deal with Australia, actually, ANZFA, Australian New Zealand Food Standards Authority, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand has an exception to that agreement so that we don't have to have country of origin labelling. That is a bizarre situation to be in, and all we have to do is adhere to that trans-Tasman relationship, have country of origin labelling, consumers know what they're buying, Mr. Speaker, and the fine quality food produced here in New Zealand can be identified by consumers, so that you know, the option of buying an Italian or a Chinese kiwi fruit, Mr. Speaker, can be known to the consumer when they go to buy. So, in concluding, Mr. Speaker, I say that Labor supports this legislation. We've assisted the Select Committee with the processing of this. We need to ensure that you know, we maintain discipline in the marketplace. The model of the Horticultural Export Authority regulations should be imposed across other sectors of the primary sector where we have undisciplined marketing and coordination. We'd all be better off if we thought more laterally and collaborated in all our efforts, Mr. Speaker.